Welcome to No Compromises, a peek into the mind of two old web devs who have seen some things. This is Joel.
And this is Aaron.
As I sit here looking at the computer screen, just over the monitor is a shelf of books, computer books, most of which I have not read, but they're there because I think they look cool or someday I'm going to like them. And I know we had talked about a topic, not necessarily recommending specific books, but just kind of like the idea of like using books as a resource and even kind of how it changes, throughout your career and levels of experience.
Well, first of all, I think you should know that those books are supposed to be like behind the camera so I can see how well read you aren't.
That's right. Yeah. I just have a bare wall behind me now. That's no good.
But yeah, I think that makes sense because as time goes on, I've noticed that I've reread the same books a couple times. Also, like fiction books, I've read the couple of books that I read in high school, and I read them most recently, and I'm like, oh, now that I'm an adult, I understand what this was trying to say.
Okay.
So
Sure.
you end up getting some context in your brain as you age or as you get more experience or all these different things, right?
Mhm.
So more experience, aging, having just different insights to your own decisions change as time goes on, and then seeing all those different things. I think the same effect happens for programming books.
Okay. All right. Do you have an example in mind, or are we going to avoid specific topics?
Yeah, no,
Titles.
I'll give you an example.
Okay.
So, I mean, I can't remember the actual name of the book. So, what a great podcast. But the slang is the Gang of Four. So, the
Yes.
Gang
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
Four design
Design
patterns book.
patterns. Yeah.
Yeah, super big book. And so I had read that now I think three times. So
Really? Wow.
the first time I read it was in college, and I'll be real clear, my first time going through college. So I was doing a computer science degree. I was learning Java, and I read the Gang of Four's book. And at that time, I was a hotshot young programmer, and I was like, these guys, they're just making programming so boring, and I can't believe this is all from the 70s, and all these different things that was like I don't need this book. And so I'm probably made it about halfway through. I'm sure you've had experiences like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. No, that particular book I don't own. I had to lean over and look at the shelf. I don't have it. I don't think I've read it. Is it kind of an encyclopedia format where it's like here's a pattern and we discuss it, or is there some sort of narrative or other structure to it? Do you even remember? Has it?
Honestly, I don't remember. I think it
Okay.
was the Encyclopedia Sword, but
Yeah.
it's been a couple of years since I read it again.
Yeah. I think I flipped through it. That's the extent of my interaction with it.
Yeah. So at that point, I think I actually even sold the book. And if you think about it, we always joke about how we're seasoned and salty professionals. That would have been a long time ago, and the book
Yeah.
was pretty cheap. Now, if you look at those sort of books, they're super expensive. I wish I would have kept it, But I then got it about 10 years into my programming life, and I read it again, and maybe 8 years, 8, 10. And that was at the same time that I realized that there was some intelligence in all these design patterns. And I've been doing it enough now that I recognized a lot of my work that they were talking about.
Okay.
So,
So like
different.
you didn't use like you weren't like I'm using the strategy pattern, but like you had encountered the same problems and maybe even kind of done your own version of that, and then you reread it and you're like, oh, that's the thing that I was doing that solved that problem.
Yeah, the biggest one was probably like the adapter pattern, where it
Okay.
was, like adapting one service to another.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that time, I was working with AS400 and the DB2 databases and
Are you sure you
SQLite.
weren't
And
programming in the 70s? Like I'm there. I kid. I kid.
yeah. And so, you had to write little sort of adapters to
Mm-hmm.
make usage in more of the current tool sets. And I started going, oh, well, this isn't new. This amazing idea I came up with is
Right.
actually, either I learned it or I, somehow thought of it, but it was still
Yeah.
a pattern that everyone used and
Mm-hmm.
something I should pay attention to. So that was the time when I went and took that book and I reread most of it. Again, I can't remember the format, so this is horrible. Uh,
I'm not one to talk. I forget things all the time that I read. The knowledge is in there though. Like I have no doubt
yeah,
about that. Yeah.
yeah. You take the knowledge in, and
Mm-hmm.
then however it was delivered is which is what every author loves to hear.
That's
However
right.
it was
That's right.
written, I don't care.
Exactly.
So I read that, and that was at the time. I also wrote my own version of the PHP design patterns book for Wiley, and I used that book as a big reference to kind of convert some of these things from what those were basically like older languages or Java specific things over to PHP, and showing that you can do this in PHP as well.
Okay.
So that also taught me a lot. We always talk about like how if you teach something, you learn it better.
Right. Yeah.
So writing that book was the same thing for me. So, and then I think I read it maybe another 10 years after that. And I had a different take on it yet again, which was most of these things are still great ideas, but you have to understand why they're great ideas.
Okay.
So at first, the first read was, what are they talking about? These aren't good ideas. The second read was, these are great ideas. I should use them for everything.
Yep.
And then the third read was, well, most of these are good ideas, but they're context specific.
Right. You could go too far with them. You're starting to recognize, like, if you just blindly, like, how many patterns can I shove into this feature? That's probably not a great approach either.
Well, it's interesting too, because if I look at that pattern in my own understanding of that book, I can see how it lined up with the years I was programming and what I was learning and how I was becoming a more professional developer. And it also shows in my code, because I still have some code from years back.
Nice.
And it also gives me a nice little reference when I'm looking at people's code for a code review or to hire them or something like that. You can tell that there's sort of like a bell curve of complexity that tends to happen. So people will develop really simple versions of things with a lot of redundancy, then over-architected things at the top of the curve, and then back down to somewhere in the middle at the sort of lower part of that curve again. And that's kind of where most people end up staying.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I guess I'm starting to wonder, like, how many years out are you from your fourth read now? Like, is there a pattern here? Is it going to get another read? No, that's interesting. And as you're talking, I was kind of thinking if there's any books like that for me. The one book that comes to mind, and again, this is not like a episode about specific recommendations, but the one that I keep coming back to is actually not a tech book in the truest sense. It's called Pragmatic Thinking and Learning, and it's more about like how to acquire knowledge, and it is written kind of with the software developer in mind. I mean, it's published by Pragmatic Press, which makes a lot of programming books, but I can see the same things there too. Like I remember the first time I read through that, and just like this enthusiasm of like, I'm going to do all these things and I'm going to like learn all these languages, and I'm going to be a smarter person. And I've definitely come back around now where it's like, I kind of want to get really good at like one or two things. Like I don't need to know 12 different things and try to stay up with all of them.
Yeah, I feel like I knew you during that time when you were learning everything. And I was like, Joel, settle down, buddy.
Yeah. But yeah,
it was just because I couldn't keep up.
That's right. No, I mean, that's a different topic entirely. But in terms of that book, like, boy, the most recent time I read it was probably about 5 years ago. And I remember just having a very different outlook on it. Part of it too, it kind of aligns with what your experience was, even though this wasn't a technical topic, but it was more of just, I think, having developed more opinions and having more experience under my belt, I kind of approached it with more of a skeptical mindset, not like, oh, I don't believe this, but like, well, why? Like they make a statement, really? Oh, okay. And so I think that's part of when you gain experience, and especially if you reread a book, why you have a different outlook, because you have more experience to compare it to, and authors are not infallible, right? So, or you may just have a different experience than they did, and so that's okay, right? That's part of why we read and expand our horizons.
So would you say the last time you read it, you approached it more in a pragmatic way? So I remember when I was a little kid, we were on a vacation or something, and I must have been like 3 or 4 because I can barely remember it.
Oh.
And in the middle of the night, my mom jumped up, and we were all in like a hotel room, and I noticed that she woke up, and she started beating on the window. It was like a cabin style, and just
Okay.
beating on it, like, and saying, "There's a fire. We got to get out." And
Okay.
luckily, my aunt was there too, and she calmed her down, and everything was fine.
Mhm.
And I didn't really think too much about that. And then when I turned about 2021, I started experiencing things like that. It was basically
Hmm.
hereditary night terror.
Wow.
And so now I have to be very careful if I have guests over, because
Oh no.
because then you have to be careful how you dress, so you got to be fully dressed, because I'm not kidding. Sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and just run into the hallway and be like, or like, because I think there's spiders, or I think there's like someone like in the corner of my room, or I think one time I was, and I know this is very perfectly a nerd thing, but on the one side of the room, it looked like the room was turning into the Borg from Star Trek.
Sure. Yep.
And so I was like, I got to get out of here.
I want to make fun of you somehow, but I had a bout of that too. And I just think, and it actually started like with a real fire. Like there was a fire in the apartment building next to ours. And so we got woken up by the firemen like pounding on our door saying like, you have to leave. So that was like kind of traumatic. And this was as an adult, by the way. But like there's a period of 2 to 3 years where if you touched me while I was sleeping and I was like in the wrong REM sleep or whatever, I would like just scream something. And like I wouldn't wake up at all. So my poor kids like would walk into the room and like touch my foot and I would scream something. And yeah, they don't come in our room anymore. It's interesting.
You can go and spend a few $1,000s on books, or you can spend a few $1,000s on Joel and Aaron.
If that sounds interesting, head over to nocompromises.io and see how we work with teams.